So, welcome everyone to the filmmaking panel discussion at the BFI London Film Festival. Very excited to have you all here. So I'm going to kind of go around and talk to you about each of your individual films. So I'm going to kind of go through and talk you through who I'm going to speak to you first. So Jennifer Peedom, you're here for your film Mountain. So can you tell me a little bit about the film, which has a gigantic scope, I suppose?
It does, yeah. So Mountain is an unusual film. It's technically a documentary, but it's barely a documentary. It's more of an experiential, immersive kind of film. It began as a collaboration with the Australian Chamber Orchestra, so it actually was a commission from them. They're an orchestra known for their collaborations with visual artists, and they asked me to create this work, and then we also made it into a cinema film as well. But it's a film that explores the nature of our fascination with mountains. So I had spent a lot of time in the mountains when I was younger as a climbing camera operator, but I also made a feature documentary a couple of years ago that was at the London Film Festival called Sherpa. And so it's something that I've been interested in for a long time, is why some of us are compelled to risk our lives for something that can't love us back. So so it's a very visual, musical film, and it also has a very sparse narration track by a British writer called Robert Macfarlane, who wrote Mountains of the Mind, and it's narrated by Willem Dafoe.
It's really beautiful, and then you've also got the orchestra on top as well,
yes,
giving it that amazing atmosphere. It's
yep.
not for the faint-hearted, and obviously you're about to watch it in the IMAX, which will give it an incredible scope as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there must have been moments where you were doing some of those shots and you were thinking, I feel sick. Were there?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have vertigo, it's definitely, I've heard that people have to close their eyes in some of the film. I don't have vertigo. I don't mind being at heights. I struggle more in the ocean than I do in mountains. But it is a very visceral kind of film. I mean, at once there's beautiful nature, but then it also examines the changing relationship that we have with mountains. 300 years ago, the idea of setting out to climb a mountain just wouldn't have happened, yet here we are today. You know, people throw themselves off. So we do explore the extreme end of those kind of mountain sports.
Yeah. And speaking of drama, Ruth Mader, you've got Life Guidance. So this is really a dystopian thriller about sort of happiness and surveillance. How did you feel bringing this to screen? It's very intense.
It was an intensive work. We worked on the screenplay for 2 years. We thought about the topic first, about not feeling comfortable with the sort of society we're living in. And after an analysis, and we also found out that the European Union has a program to reduce the fat people. So this was the idea to make a fiction that an agency called Life Guidance is trying to optimize the individuals.
Part of me, when I was watching along with it, was thinking, actually, I'd quite like to be optimized in some small way. And then, obviously, the consequences of it is really frightening. Do you actually see that in our future?
Yes.
Yes, very soon. And Brexit will maybe split us off into a different direction. Nora Twomey, so you've got The Breadwinner, which is a really beautiful sort of animated kind of trail through Afghanistan and one girl's journey. So what can you tell us about the film?
It's a co-production between 3 countries, so Ireland, Luxembourg and Canada came together to make this film. We've had over 300 contributors with our voice cast, our animators, our artists and compositors working on the film. It's the story of a young girl growing up in Afghanistan during the Taliban era. Her father is arrested, and it's at a time where young girls and women weren't allowed outside without a male relative with them, so she cuts her hair and dresses as a boy in order to provide for her family. That's kind of one way of looking at the story. Another way of looking at the story is Parwana's a young storyteller, and her father was a storyteller, and through the film we hear her voice become stronger as a storyteller. And it's a film that's very much about the idea of hope and I suppose the idea of conflict. It's also a film that introduces younger audiences to subject matters that they might not be used to seeing, and it's very much a film that we looked at trying to open discussions and dialogue between parents and young people, you know.
And what sort of age range do you think that the film is suitable for, and kind of?
I think I would say from about 9 or 10 years upwards. It depends on the child. Honestly, I've got a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old who sit and have no problem with it, whereas films with supernatural themes that might seem younger, they have, they can get more upset with. So I think certainly as parents, sometimes what we think is going to upset our children isn't necessarily what upsets our children. And children will always find something, I think, in their environment, because it's our jobs as adults, I don't think, are to keep children away from things that might upset them. I think that our job is to give them the tools with which to deal with those things and to articulate them and to work through them. So films like The Breadwinner very much go some way toward that, I think.
And thinking about that, obviously the films that you've all made are very diverse, in look and feel, but actually they're all confronting very unique but of the moment messages that are happening, whether it's climate change in our natural world, the kind of surveillance and social media, and also the sort of scary hard news stories that are coming out across the world. So does it feel right and real that you're here at the LFF sort of representing those stories? Like, do you feel proud of that fact that you're able to bring them to screen?
Yeah, I mean, it's lovely to be at the London Film Festival. I was here 2 years ago, and it's a great festival, but to be recognised in this way is really special. But one of the things, being a director, we've just been talking about this, is travelling around the world, and the kind of, at film festivals, the conversations that you can have with audiences, but also other directors, about your film. You learn things about your own film, in fact, and the way that different audiences interpret them. It might be totally different in one country to another, and so it's really rewarding to share the work and put it out into the world and see how audiences respond.
I mean, Ruth, with your film, are you watching some of the kind of big TV shows that are also kind of touching on some of those dystopian, dark sides of technology, like Black Mirror and the Electric Dreams show that's coming out from Philip K. Dick, Blade Runner as well, things like that?
Some of them. I'm not obsessed with it, but I'm obsessed more with classical films like Clockwork Orange. This is was very important when I made this film, or the novel 1984. So this was important.
Yeah, I was always very obsessed with those stories when I was growing up, and to sort of feel that some of those strains of, technology are coming through in our lives and being watched and stuff is really horrendous. But your film really realises that in a very modern way, but also takes it back to those kind of films. You can tell by the scenes and stuff. So, I mean, Nora, for you, how do you feel with regards to it being animation, the reception that you get at festivals? Is it different? Can you tell?
Yeah, as an animator, we're always struggling against animation being seen as a genre, and we prefer it to be seen as a medium, really, because, and it is, when you make a film like The Breadwinner, sometimes people look at a film like this and they see what it should be in terms of what they think it should be in terms of, the humour, the age group that it's aimed at and all of this, and they say, well, it's not this, why not? And it can't be something else, but why not? Why can't it be a film that has more depth to it, that has characters that exploring things through animation? I think it's a really, really wonderful medium. It's a really collaborative medium, and so when you're and it takes a long time. So the thought that goes into animated film, we can layer the levels of thought in it, and the experiences of, say, some of our actors who are Afghan, who brought their own stories and their parents' stories and their stories as refugees. Into this film, they were all interesting ways to explore. Animation is absolutely, and being at the London Film Festival and having young people in the audience raise their hands and ask questions, and really intelligent questions and hard-hitting questions. It's an experience for me, but it's an experience for adults in the audience as well, to realise the kind of questions that children ask and the way that they take on board information like we have in The Filmmaker or in The Breadwinner.
And you talk about that sort of multi-layered perspective that you took, and that some of the actors brought their stories, but how difficult is it to adjust the kind of storylines which one comes first? The kind of meeting with actors and talking it through with them, or the storyboarding and then the actual animation?
Yeah, it is kind of chicken and egg. So yeah, we
Do you add in bits after?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
We do, absolutely. And right up until up until like 2 weeks before we finished the film, we were changing little bits of dialogue. So you're always perfecting, and animation allows you to do that. With live action, I don't know, but if you don't do it on the day, that's depending on your budget, that can be it. Whereas with animation, you can give a piece of direction, go sleep on it, and come back the next day and say to the animator, have you started that scene yet? Because remember what I told you yesterday, just scrap it,
Yeah.
So you have time to do things. So I think that's certainly different with animation.
And I mean, Jennifer, like you're at the mercy of the elements with the kind of filmmaking that you do. What was the craziest experience you had whilst putting the film together?
Well, I mean, we filmed all over the world, and my cinematographer also opened up his library, so I luckily wasn't there for all of it because we filmed in 15 countries all over the world. But I mean, I've had many intense experiences in the mountains. And I mean, we were filming on Everest in 2014 when the avalanche killed 16 Sherpas, which was very intense. The following year, the earthquake happened in Nepal and more avalanches. So there's been some particularly intense experiences there, but then also just some beautiful experiences. We shot in Niseko in the very north of Japan, which is just one of those, it's like living in a fairy tale, So there was some really beautiful kind of experiences on all of those sides.
And does it ever make you think you want to make a kind of safely grounded film, or is it you're going to be up in the mountains forever?
Yeah, no, I definitely need to stop making films in the mountains at some point.
I don't think so.
But I think in the idea, I mean, your films had very thematic threads. I think my film probably examines, our disconnection from nature, and that, there's part of that is pulling us back, and people feel compelled to feel alive in these intense environments.
And speaking of kind of being disconnected from nature, your film is literally about being disconnected from human nature, isn't it? It's about us being kind of repositioned by everything that's around us. So where did you come up with that storyline from? Like, do you feel that it's been done to you and you were thinking, I need to halt this?
The main idea was the genre, to make a science fiction film where the people realize during watching the film that it's the situation is now.
Yeah.
And then it was hard work, the rest.
Yeah. How far in are we hoping that they'll twig? Is there you just want them to be aware all the way through, or like at the end?
No, it's you're starting to realize it during you're watching it.
Yeah, yeah. So your worldview is very dark. Do you think that your worldview is dark? Like
If the world for me is dark?
Well, yeah, but considering because it's a very sort of dark and dystopian.
Yeah.
Yeah. You think it is a scary world out there. So, talking about the festival as a whole, this year has marked one of the kind of best representations of female filmmakers that they've ever had.
How many percent?
Oh, I think it's over a quarter, but yeah. So that's one of the largest. They weren't sure if it's fully the largest they've ever had. But do you feel that you can see that gender gap is being addressed now with regards to female filmmakers at festivals? And
there's certainly an awareness of it. I was on the festival circuit 2 years ago when that push began, and you're definitely aware of it. And we do things like this, and there's a focus on being a female director. Certainly in my country, in Australia, there's a very big push from the government funding side to really raise the quotas of female directors. So it feels like a good time to be a female director, but at the same time, you often, when you're making a film, you don't think of yourself as a female filmmaker. You're just making a film for an audience. But it's great to see, these numbers improving for sure, because they needed to.
Absolutely. How about you, Nora? Have you noticed that?
I have, and certainly our film board as well in Ireland are making a concerted effort as well to try and encourage female filmmakers. And I think that we have a responsibility as well, I think, as female filmmakers to try and encourage on the next generation, I think. And certainly in animation, you always have a thing where you have, more so now than ever, you have a lot of female students coming up through the colleges, and in lots of ways they outnumber the young men coming through colleges, but then they hit a point, and it's usually around the point of, you know, wanting to have a family and that, and to make sure that we can create an environment which is for a filmmaking environment, be it animation or live action, which respects families, I think, you know, and is realistic about, you know, the balance that everyone wants to get in their life. And I think that will help male directors as much as female directors, you know, it'll help families in that sense, and that will inform the stories that we tell. And I think that would be fantastic if we could get that kind of balance, you know, in film.
How do you feel that balance is in the animation world? Do you feel that it's really good, or?
Our teams are about half and half, but when you come into the roles of like supervisor roles and that, you tend to have more male than female. So it's always a. And I mean, I hate, you know, because I don't want to generalize about, you know, women do this and men do this and whatever, but, you know, I do find that the women in animation, anyway, tend to overthink things a little bit too much, and they don't just, you know, grab the position that they want to get into. They don't just grab it. They think of maybe, you know, I often find that women have, you know, if they see problems in a production, they'll go and solve those problems as opposed to going for the, you know, the supervisor role or something like that. So certainly over the last couple of years, I've really tried to make sure that I was, you know, as encouraging as possible to, you know, and make sure that I don't use women to fix problems, you know, in a production, you know, that I'm aware of it, and unfortunately have to be aware of it. And I think that's the thing. I'd love to live in a world where we didn't have to talk about, you know, so that it's not just I made a film, no, but as a female director I made a film, you know, and that becomes an important thing. I'd love, but I think it's maybe for the next generation, you know, to do that, and we have to take on board the fact that we have to constantly talk about being women in film.
Do you think that talking about being a woman in film is helpful, or do you think that it's better to just say I'm a director? Because obviously, you know, you talked about that. You think we should establish?
Oh, absolutely, we have to. I mean, that there are all types of insidious silences, I think, you know, kind of thing that you know, which make it unequal. So you have to identify it in order to be able to kind of challenge it, I think. Yeah,
and to nut out the issues. You know, talking about family, we were talking about our kids. You know, we're away from our kids right now, and it's really important to say that these are some of the barriers to entry for people. You know, I work in a very male-dominated sector of the film industry, you know, the adventure world, and you know, there's not many female directors working on Mount Everest and, you know, that kind of thing, and so it's really important to kind of, I think, give this oxygen, and hopefully some young women will listen and think, well, it is possible, and then as a community of filmmakers, we can kind of help each other find solutions to these problems, and help our institutions and government institutions also help lower those barriers to entry. And sometimes it's just seeing other people and having role models, you know, the people that you can believe in, or look up to think, well, she did it, she had kids. And that's the question I'm often asked the most, is how do you do it with a family? And so it's good to be able to talk about those things, so people think, okay, maybe I can do this.
Yeah, because there's a lot of talk about whether, you know, sort of talking about the sort of work-life balance aspect and how it affects childcare and stuff is sort of reductive. But actually, like you say, unless you hear it said, people won't feel empowered to move on into the industry and think, yeah, I'll give that a go as well, and kind of recruit more women.
And that changes as well. I think if young women are watching an industry where it's male dominated, and they say, well, I'm not going to reach that level because I want to have a family, then they don't get to change the environment, and they don't get to change the whole, you know, the way the industry works. Whereas if they do go in there and they say, hang on, I've got, you know, 3 kids, whatever, but I bloody well want to tell the story, you know, then they change everything for the next generation. So it is chicken and egg, I guess, as well, you know. So you need to, you know, we need it to be broader, for sure.
And last question, what's next after the LFF? What are you going on to do after this?
I'm jumping on a plane tomorrow back home to my children in Sydney.
Yeah.
And I've got lots of projects in the air, and it's just a juggling game at the moment.
Can you reveal any of the exotic destinations you'll be heading to for the adventure, the next adventure?
No, because I'm going to be writing.
Right.
So I'm probably going to be locking myself in a library.
How long do you tend to write for?
It all depends, because I'm just crossing over into drama now, so it's a new experience for me. But in the next documentary I'm looking at will probably be nowhere near mountains and in the church, actually. So very different.
Yeah. How about you, Ruth? What are you up to next?
I go to Busan and then to Chicago, and the film is also shown in Thessaloniki, so I will have a couple of destinations, and after that I will concentrate on my family, get the next child hopefully, and after that I make a project which is written already.
Okay. And can you give us a teaser on what that project
it's a
is?
thriller again. It's a thriller, but about radical Catholic faith.
Oh, going into the church, both of you. Interesting. Nora, have you got any plans to unveil any Irish Catholicism or something?
Well, personally, over the next couple of months, anyway, the film is coming out in the States, so we're going over to publicise the film as much as I can there. Yeah. But yeah, back into development. Then I know Tom in our studio has a film called Wolfwalkers, which is in early development now. And I have another project called My Father's Dragon, which is based on a novel again, or on a children's book. So yeah, lots of things in development.
Very exciting. Well, I think that's all we need. Thanks.